now we have got Ian Davies. So he's a HCPC registered biomedical scientist. His background is in clinical practice and laboratory management within the NHS. First within haematology and transfusion science, and then before cross-training in clinical biochemistry. His interests span the career-long education and development of biomedical scientists, and in widening the input of clinical laboratories within clinical pathways and research. In addition to postgrad qualifications in biomedical science, Ian's got a postgrad certificate in medical education and is a fellow of the IBMS and the Higher Education Academy and a member of the Royal Society of Biology. Wow. In 2018, Ian and a colleague, Dr. Angela Priestman, were awarded the Chief Scientific Officer's Healthcare Science Award for Excellence in Education Delivery. That's a really prestigious award by Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, on behalf of the Biological Sciences team at Staffordshire University for their innovative implementation of healthcare science degree apprenticeships. Again, something that we're seeing more and more apprenticeships. In conjunction with his colleague Kate Berger, the training manager at University Hospitals of North Mid, Ian won the 2018 Advancing Healthcare Award for inspiring the future biomedical science workforce. So we're really privileged to have Ian here today, who is looking after your interests. Lastly, in addition to his academic role, Ian is a Fitness to Practice panel member. So part of being a biomedical scientist is ensuring that you are fit to practice. And he's an education visitor for the Health and Care Professions Council and is a member of the Healthcare Foundation funded Q community. Lovely. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, welcome. Good afternoon. Lovely to see a good full auditorium of interested and engaged students, and that is absolutely vital. And before I start, I'm going to go completely off script and just go back to a couple of points in that last session, because in one of my roles, and I'll talk a little bit about the things I've done in a second, I've been a lab manager and I've been on the other end of the interview process looking at applications coming in, and there was absolute gold dust in that last couple of pieces of advice about actually going and having a look around the lab when you can, when you've got the opportunity to make a contact. If you can't go, just to send an email and express an interest is absolutely vital. That sort of thing, making yourself known to an employer is really, really, really important. You'd be surprised, and I was surprised when I started doing interviews, how few people actually make that contact. So absolutely go for that. That was absolutely top tip advice. So I'm going to talk a little bit and ask about my journey, just to start with, just to talk about the sorts of things that I've done, and perhaps in a way to talk about careers don't have to be a linear thing. You can bounce around a career, taking lots of different roles as you find opportunities. So I'll just talk a little bit about the sorts of things I've done and maybe why I've done them. And then we'll pick up on a few general career things and a few sort of tips maybe. So I started off, as I imagine the vast majority of you did at school. You like science, you like biology, you probably like human biology, you like anything that's sort of clinical, anything that's related to health and disease and things like that. That's what hooked me. But at that time, that was quite a while back, careers advice wasn't great. And so the advice on what to do with that knowledge and interest and passion wasn't really there. And I remember distinctly having to fill in one of these careers things you have to do at school. And I imagine it's very sophisticated now, and I'm sure there's AI and all sorts of stuff involved. But we had a piece of paper with questions that had to tick. That went off, and then about a fortnight later, we got this sort of printed off list of jobs that they thought we would be able to do. And I can remember mine quite vividly, because it was medicine, dentistry, estate agent, and abattoir. And to this day, I still can't remember what combination of questions and answers I would have to give to get that. I can see the medicine and the dentistry. I'm not quite sure which of the other two were worse, but even so, I didn't know. Certainly on that list came nothing to do with healthcare, nothing to do with biomedical science, absolutely nothing that showed me that there was a route into that profession. And to be honest, I only found out of it by doing work experience. I actually went to do work experience at my local hospital on a ward, because that's what they thought I'd do, because it was interested in medicine. And whilst I was on there, I sort of found these forms and saw these tests being done, and they actually sent me off to the pathology lab, the microbiology lab, to get some work experience, see what they could do with me, because I clearly wasn't interested in the ward side of it. And then I met soon to be a lifelong colleague of mine and good friend Ian Parker, who works at Wolverhampton in microbiology, who showed me that this stuff existed, and I had got absolutely no idea, as someone just going into their A-levels, no idea that this was even an option. From there, that took me into biomedical science. I did my degree. I was fortunate at that time that my degree included a placement, a funded placement. It was funded by the Regional Health Authority, and it was a placement all the way through my degree, based at Telford and Shrewsbury Hospital. I rotated around the departments and ended up sort of in haematology and transfusion science. And that was amazing. That was brilliant. I say HCPC registered, I'm actually that old, it was Council of Professional Supplementary Medicine. I'd say a couple of nods at the front and that's it, sorry. Old school, showing my age. But got registered and then started to look for work. Fairly fortunate, I found a job fairly quickly as a biomedical scientist in a completely different discipline. I moved into biochemistry and spent time in biochemistry at Stafford Hospital. I did a master's, fortunate to have the time to do a master's, did that, became a fellow of the Institute and got a senior position. And within that senior position, I got quite an interest in training new staff, training staff, medical staff who come in around the wards, doing portfolio assessments, all that sort of stuff, in addition to what I was supposed to be a senior for. And that's another top tip, is to try and find additional responsibilities where you can to build up a portfolio. That interest in training then really ignited something I'd perhaps been thinking about for a while, that there must be something else I can do. I really enjoy being in the lab, I wanted to do other stuff as well. And a part of my talk at the end is follow things that really interest you, and follow things that you can see where you've got a love for. So I really enjoyed teaching and training, and so I went off and did PGCE, but in medical education, that's how you teach junior doctors the skills. And I thought that was quite relevant to the things I was doing in the lab. We were looking at competency and so forth, making fairly important life and death decisions. I was promoted to lab manager. That's where all that interviewing stuff came in, and actually found that lab management wasn't where I wanted to be. I'd fallen out of love with that. Still loved the subject, but not what I was doing as an application. And I was fortunate enough then to find research. Research was something I'd never even thought of before. I took a clinical internship, which is where the National Institute of Health Research took me out of my job for a short amount of time and exposed me to a whole variety of different sort of research pathways. And that led to where I am now as an academic biomedical scientist. So I'm still registered, I still practice, but in a different way. I'm looking at things at an academic level. So the topic of this talk really was to look at where a degree can take you. Where can biomedical science take you? And actually, anywhere. I've got a few things on that list, and I'll talk through those general topics of where you might be thinking about. But actually, as Anna said, anywhere. You can do absolutely anything. Because what you're getting is a degree whereby you have to take on new knowledge, you have to apply that knowledge, you have to work out new knowledge from that, you have to be able to synthesize, you have to be able to work in a team. And all these things are the really important things. Everything you do, obviously, at university is important. Everything you do towards a module is important in progression from module to module. But the one thing that I perhaps hadn't really considered until I started teaching was all the other stuff. Those skills that you're getting are the real bits of gold that you take forward to your career. The ability at, if you're in a final year module, you may have 10 or 12 weeks to really get an in-depth knowledge of a very specialist skill. You have to be able to analyse that, critically evaluate that, do all that in a very short period of time. But it doesn't actually matter what that topic is. Clearly it does for your degree or for progression. But in terms of the skill you're taking away, that ability to do that is what you're selling. That's what makes you sort of indispensable as a graduate. So I'll just whiz through. I'll talk about some of these sort of topics. I'll talk about the sorts of things you can do. But then I'll finish off with a little bit of sort of general advice on how you can sort of maximise opportunities. So the obvious one in biomedical science is to go into clinical practice, is to get registration, work in a clinical pathology department, of which there are some examples there. every time I write a list, I'm always conscious I'm going to miss one out and really offend people. So if I say that from the start, then that's intentional. And you'll know about these, you'll have come across these within your course. There's lots of information about them, and about the career pathway, certainly on the HCPC and on the Institute website. Have a look at those and find out the resources that are there. But this is developing things like genomics and where they might be applicable across the board. Things that you are absolutely best placed to talk about in an interview, because they should be embedded within the sort of things you're doing in the degree. You know exactly the type of things that are cutting edge that you can take to an interview. And clinical practice is great. I've enjoyed it. I've had a great career doing that, being in a lab, love a lab. I completely nodded my head when Ash was talking about night shifts. I actually loved working on call. I wouldn't do it now. I think I'm too old. I'd feel too old. But I absolutely loved it. I love that independence of being able to make autonomous decisions without a team to help. If there's a problem, I've got to fix the problem. If there's an interesting case that doesn't fit what I already know, I've got to be the one that investigates that and sorts that out. And I really, really love that. But you know, there are lots of things about the job I love. I love the fact that actually what I was doing was important. It helped people. People who would never know that it was me there, with teams that would never know that really what was going on in the background. But that ability to help someone in quite desperate circumstances sometimes was what love I took from that job. So a lot of options there. And don't be afraid to bounce around these. A lot of the technologies used in these departments are very similar. So think about, if you do want to move between departments, think about where the common ground is. Think what you already know. Although the name on the door might be different, the application might be different, actually the topics and the nuts and bolts of a method are quite often things that you will already know. A lot of students think about a research career, and again, that's something that is has an interest and you're more than capable of pursuing. Think about what sort of research it is. Research could be pure bench research, absolutely basic science, where you're not even, you've sort of got a big blue sky in front of you and you're trying to find a big solution. Or it could be applied research, which is where I sort of more naturally fit. I like to find a solution to a problem and then work on that and test that out using sort of research methods. But when you dip into this career, there's a whole spectrum as well. You could maybe do an internship. Research groups will often take students on as interns just to find out if that's an environment they're working in. It's a very different pace and different pressures to a clinical lab. And people find where best they fit. You could look at it and in terms of actual academia, so going through an MSc or a PhD, a doctorate or a Master of Philosophy as a stepping stone to look at that. Or you might just want to work in a lab, work as a research assistant within a group to get your feet and find out if that atmosphere sort of fits you. And then you can think about where that takes you, and that could take you then bouncing back into a clinical career or into an academic career, or do, as it's a really interesting job, a bit of both, a clinical academic, whereby you do some work in a lab, some work of research. All of those are really useful skills that you've got and you can develop quite easily. You might want to think about clinical careers themselves. You might want to think you've got a whole load of knowledge on very specialist clinical topics. Your courses will show you the impact that can have on patients and the impact that science can have. And you might want to take that further and go into a pure clinical career. So you're ideally suited to apply for graduate entry clinical professions, medicine, dentistry, and so forth. More and more of my students are looking at the role, quite a new role, of physician associate, working with junior doctors in pathways. And certainly if you do engage in social media and do find some people to follow, you'll find a lot of those have got biomedical science backgrounds. Because you come in with that underpinning knowledge, that ability, as I mentioned, to be able to pick up on a piece of information, use it, synthesize new stuff from it to a really advanced level. That's just the grounding you need to that sort of career. You could think of diversifying a scientific career. So you could think about a wider application of science in healthcare through the scientist training program. Very competitive, but covers a whole variety of clinical specialisms, which you can apply for. You don't have to restrict yourself to the one that you've heard of. If you go and look at the National School of Healthcare Science website, you will find this in detail. It will tell you about the career paths that are there. But there are some really new emerging scientific disciplines coming out in that, to do with genomics. Different advances, or different applications rather, of the science through critical care science, working in intensive care units, looking at patient monitoring. All of these are really new and are options that certainly were never available when I was looking at a career. And they're the options that you don't find unless you do the digging and the looking. If you take a walk through the hall, you'll see that that hall, the exhibition halls, are absolutely full of diagnostic companies, life science industries, all looking for graduate positions. They're sometimes difficult to find. The big ones are all there. They're the ones with the big stalls doing sushi and giving you free coffee and all of that. But there's a whole load of little start-up, small to medium businesses on science parks all across the country that are really keen on graduates coming in and working with them. It's experience, it's a foot in the door to find out whether you like that. But it's also different opportunities, different experiences. So it might be in developing products and product development and all the sorts of things that you will know about in terms of quality assurance and the processes involved in getting a method to work right and reproducible. But it could be using different skills. So if you find yourself quite technical, actually field engineers, support engineers for diagnostic companies. So if that's what you enjoy, that's a really good combination of both your scientific knowledge and application. And if you're a bit of an entrepreneur, if you like talking the talk and you like to do a bit of sales and sales pitch, actually sales in that industry, being a sales reps, territory managers, actually people who have come from this background who know what the talk is, really good sales stuff. And then I've looked everything into this one, everything else. Actually, it is everything else. It could be teaching, project management, finance, management, supervision, all the things that you use within your degree. You can, your numerate, your articulate, you can do critical evaluation. All of these are really important skills that could go into a whole range of different careers. Just to show that I'm not talking nonsense and making all this up, I've got some examples. So see, these are all former students of mine. I'm not sure whether they all know that they're on here, but they will do probably soon by the time I've tweeted it. But they work across all of this. So Nikita works, she's a biomedical scientist, she works at NHS Blood and Transplant. Again, came from a biomed programme. My now colleague, Trust is was a biomedical science student, came through our course, went off and did a placement, became a biomedical scientist, then went off and did a teacher training course, and then decided that research was where he landed. And so he now works with us. He's just writing up his PhD. He's a research scientist, an absolute expert on cell culture, tissue culture, but absolutely thrives on that side of application of biomedical science. Lucy, again, biomedical science student, graduated, became a biomedical scientist, worked in a microbiology lab, and then decided she wanted to do teaching. So she went off and did a teacher training course. She's now a secondary school and high school teacher who started at school for her first year as a newly qualified teacher a couple of weeks ago. Because she'd always wanted to do teaching, she'd always wanted to do science, and she wasn't quite sure where she fitted, and wanted to do a bit of both. And then she felt that left her with a legitimacy to teach. When she was teaching the subject, she can reflect back on experience that she had in a lab. And then on the end there, Ashay, you might see if you go around, I'm not seeing today, but you will be on the Randox stall. Ashay is, again, a graduate of ours, but who got a real interest in sales. He's always interested in sales and project management. And so he's now a territory manager working at Randox. So all of those things, and these aren't sort of examples I've sort of cherry picked out. These are just standard careers that students go off and do. A couple of things, just to sort of conclude and bring it to a sort of a natural end. What makes you, and what gives you the career that you need, be that in an interview or along in your career? There are three things really. There's the subject and the skills, and there's you as an individual. And the subject, you know. So by the time you finish your degree, you know biomedical science. You can do biomedical science because you've got the skills that you've learned in the labs, within research projects, possibly on placement, You've got the knowledge and the skills. But what sells you to people is the things you bring as an individual. And you'll hear through all of these sessions, I think, probably a very common theme coming out. And that's the stuff that's in your control. It's things that make you individual, things that make you stand out. Talking about honey at an interview actually shows you've got a passion about a subject that you can speak really well about. It's unrealistic to expect sometimes you'll know exactly the workings of the lab you're going to move in, because you're not in there yet. But the fact that you can talk about something, you can be interested, is really, really important. Top tips, I've done a couple. There's clearly lots and lots of top tips, but ends up being that many top tips, we run out of top tips. But these are my few ones. And it is that top one, stand out. People are recruiting you. They want to see you on a piece of paper. They want to know what it is about you that makes you passionate for that job. And that's really important. And that does come across in like a personal statement and so forth. I've put soft skills. I hate the term soft skills, but everybody knows what I mean when I say it. They are absolutely vital. You'll be doing sessions with lecturers that will involve soft skills, communication, negotiation, how you work as a team, how you have autonomy, all of these things. And sometimes you don't see the point of why they're doing it. It's only for me, looking back, I can see why all those things were so important, because they are the skills that you take forward. The knowledge is great, but knowledge changes over time. So when you've been in practice for 10, 15, 20 years, you need to be keeping on top of that knowledge. It doesn't stay still at the point you graduate. All these things are things that you take with you and you develop. The extracurricular activities, doing other things, taking on whatever you can to be able to demonstrate those skills. There's opportunities to do outreach work or STEM work or anything like that. Get involved. Network. Oh, I will bang on about IBMS chat as much as I like. It's a brilliant resource. If you're not on it, your fault. You need to be there. And as Shirley said, you don't have to actively participate. You can be an observer. You can see what goes on. But it's such a rich mine of people and experiences. It really is worth taking time just to get involved in that and follow people and see what their interests are. I quite agree, that sort of opportunity was never there. No. And it's so fortunate that that sort of thing is there for you now. I made a little rule that I always have to have a family picture in a conference presentation, and I've done it every time I've spoken here. But the reason for that is because of this quote. It's a big, long, wordy quote, but it talks about when you go about building a ship, you don't go about gathering the wood and doing all of the stuff of building a ship and doing all that stuff. You do it because you love the sea. Now, that sounds a bit wordy and a bit nebulous, and where am I going with this? Well, that was me and my daughter a few years ago, sitting on a beach. Her first time to the seaside, it was amazing, and she absolutely loved it. And then a few years later, we are at the same beach. We built our boat. That boat took... It's a nice boat. It's a lovely boat, but it took absolutely hours to pump up. It took hours to drag down on what was... as you can see, low tide, miles away from our flat. And we didn't do it for that. We didn't do it for the bumps and the grinds and the hard work. We did it because we absolutely loved the sea. And the point I'm trying to make is, throughout your careers, you will have times when actually it seems really hard and you're not quite sure. But what you've got is a love for the subject, and that takes you through in what you need to have. And that love can change. You might suddenly fall out of love with it, and it's absolutely fine. Move on. There are lots of things to enjoy and explore. And I think if you can take that message, not necessarily about me on the beach, but that metaphor that actually it's not the day-to-day stuff that's necessarily important, it's your love for the subject. I think that is the take-home message. So, I hope that's been useful. I will be around all the way through the coffee break, so please do say hello. Feel free to email me, I'm quite happy with that. I'm pretty slow at responding, but I will respond. But certainly connect, tweet, send a message, it's absolutely fine. And the very best of luck with your future careers.
Amazing, thank you. Right, I bet you've all got at least one question about the different careers. Anybody? Yeah?
What was your favourite discipline that you worked in and why?
Ooh. Who's here? It's a political question. No one knows. Right.
Other disciplines are available.
Other disciplines are available. I enjoy, right, Yeah, hard. I've got microbiology and everyone here, I've got to be careful. My favourite discipline was biochemistry, and that's probably because I was in it for the longest period. But what I tried to do, and I think this is really important as well as a top tip, is although I was in biochemistry, I was fortunate I'd done multidisciplinary training, so I'd been around all the departments, and I tried to keep that going. So if I do CPD, if I do journal club and things like that, I try to dip into different disciplines. When I was in the lab, I would make sure that if there was an interesting patient, I'd go around the different disciplines to find out what they were doing to that patient, to keep that sort of momentum. Otherwise, it can be quite easy to be in a single discipline, and pathology can work in silos. We can shut the doors, and we like a big no entry sign on the door. We can be quite insular. So I think whatever you do, you will have favourite disciplines, and that can be based upon the subject. It can be based upon the techniques or the experiences that you have or the autonomy that you might have in that discipline. And the one reason I like clinical chemistry was we've got quite a lot of autonomy. We haven't got clinical scientists, we've got complete freedom within proper practice. But I think keep abreast of what else people are doing, because you fall in and out of love with lots of different things, and be able to know what's going on so you can test the water and switch is really important.
Since we've got a couple of minutes until our next speaker, perhaps it might be nice if I share why I like microbiology or microbiology and virology. And I know some of our panel are all in different disciplines, so perhaps we could share what we enjoy about our specialism. And then, as I say, please do have a look on the IBMS chat Twitter handle, and you can have a look at some of the specialisms we've already covered before and get a flavour. But of course, work experience is a great way of finding out. So I work in microbiology, and I often spend a lot of my time in our serology subsection, which mainly looks at viruses. The reason that I love this specialism so much in comparison to spending 2 years in transfusion at the very, very beginning of my career, some 10, 12 years ago, I love that there's an infinite number of clinical scenarios. So we've got so many viruses and so many clinical scenarios that no one day is the same. And I like being able to feel like I can make a difference. So I don't know if any of you know that if a woman is pregnant and she's never had chickenpox and she is exposed to chickenpox, she could get chickenpox and it could be quite detrimental for her baby and indeed her. So when we get those samples, I love reacting so fast that I know that I've made a difference for that patient. So if she hasn't got any immunity, there is something that we can do or her doctor can do to stop her contracting chickenpox or making the virus a little bit more milder. I love that in that moment, I've really made a difference for her. And I think perhaps we could all echo that we are behind doors, but you can feel like you are making a difference, even if they have no idea who we are and it's that section right in the end of the hospital that patients can't go down. As I say, it's the infinite number of clinical scenarios for me that makes every day different. Perhaps Anas, what do you like about your specialism?
So even though I've recently completed my specialist training in transfusion, I still feel like I know very little. There's so much to it, and it's just learning every single day. And also, a few years ago, the London terrorist attack happened on Westminster Bridge, and I was out for lunch. Our hospital is on the bridge, and it was literally just outside our doors. And you know, hematology and transfusion is one of the first tests that they requested for the patients as well. And any major incident or any major trauma, hematology and transfusion, your full blood count and your transfusion sample are the first things that come through. And the responsibility that puts on you. I enjoy that responsibility. Be able to make those quick decisions. Night time, if you have a patient, like I said, with major hemorrhage, you are in charge of ensuring that the patient gets the support they need. They may never see you. You're in charge of the whole of the blood bank. So I've got hundreds of units of red cells, hundreds of plasma, platelets, all to issue out, but you have to make sure they do it appropriately and what's safe for the patient. And also being able to challenge your doctors and the consultants and registrars and say, you know what, this is not right, maybe you should think about this again. Are you sure you want this product and not this? Or are you sure this is right for the patient? So I think, having that responsibility and also learning every single day, I enjoy that. And at the moment, I know very little about microbiology or chemistry or virology. Maybe a few years down the line, if I ever, fall out of love with hematology transfusion, you might see me in a microbiology.
Okay, Joss, perhaps. I know that you dabbled in a little bit of histology before.
34 years worth.
Perhaps you could just give us a little bit of flavour of what you really enjoyed.
For me, it was the specimens. I love the specimens because we never knew what was going to come through the doors next. So you could get anything from a tiny biopsy to a foot. You know, you never knew, and then you had to think about how you were going to dissect it, what you could get from it, and again, that you were making a difference to somebody's life. And I had a fantastic experience for me, not so fantastic for a colleague, but they had a lymphoma, and I was the first person to look at their biopsy when it came off the immunohistochemistry machine, and to be the first person to look at it and diagnose it and feel that you were making a difference. I mean, I actually worked with that person, so I sort of could relate it. That was the buzz for me, and I haven't been in the labs to work for quite a few years now, and I still miss the specimens. I still like to go up to histology labs, do verifications in histology labs, just know that I can smell the chemicals and have a look at this. Never lose you. Never ever lose you.
What I think I'll add is, if any of you ever do get to work in hospitals or even on placement, if they offer a training session in the mortuary and you feel up to it, please do take the opportunity to go and see a post-mortem. There is nothing like seeing the anatomy, I'm going to say it, in the flesh, because it's nothing, it is like it is in the book, but then it really comes to life. But as I say, obviously everyone's different, but really valuable experience if you do get the chance. Thank you. Ian.